This is Juniper for Push Forward Entertainment, and we'd like to thank those who are taking an interest in this Push Forward exclusive series of videos on Civil War history. We have more videos of the like being released soon under a broader series of videos that will be called A Salute to the United States Armed Forces. So stay locked in to Push Forward for your military history fix and feel free to check out some of our other content. Thank you for tuning in. Now, let's get into it.
Ulysses S. Grant's string of victories in 1862 to 63, especially Vicksburg, launched him on a trajectory that would soon eclipse Henry Halleck's role completely. In October 1863, when Union forces were in trouble at Chattanooga, Washington turned again to Grant. Halleck, as General-in-Chief, approved the decision to give Grant overall command of the newly formed military division of the Mississippi, putting him in charge of all armies in the West. In this capacity, Grant rescued the besieged Army of the Cumberland and won the Battle of Chattanooga in November 1863, another dramatic triumph. By now, Grant's achievements had outshone everyone else's, and significantly, they outshone Halleck's. President Lincoln had taken note of Grant's aggressive and unyielding leadership. In February 1864, Congress revived the Army rank of Lieutenant General, a rank previously held only by George Washington, expressly so Grant could be promoted and placed in supreme command of all Union armies. In March 1864, Grant traveled to Washington to assume his new post. The move amounted to a role reversal. Grant was elevated to General-in-Chief, while Halleck was pushed out of that job. Halleck was not fired outright. Instead, Lincoln made him Chief of Staff of the Army, a senior advisory and administrative role with no direct control over field operations. After 2 years as Lincoln's top military advisor, Halleck thus saw his authority sharply curtailed once Grant was given the reins. The transition in spring 1864 was telling. Halleck, ever the good bureaucrat, accepted his demotion without protest and actually proved far more effective as a chief of staff than he had been as commanding general. In this support position, Halleck applied his organizational talent to ensure the armies were well supplied and reinforced, carrying out Grant's directives diligently. Grant, for his part, set out to do what Halleck had not. He fundamentally reshaped Union strategy. Upon taking command, Grant vowed to change how the war in the East was conducted. He left Washington to personally accompany the Army of the Potomac in the field, indicating he would not micromanage from afar but lead from the front. More importantly, Grant formulated a coordinated nationwide offensive plan. He ordered simultaneous advances on all major Confederate armies in the spring of 1864. All the armies are to move together toward one common center, Grant instructed, aiming to prevent the Confederates from shuttling reinforcements from one threatened point to another. This was a direct response to the piecemeal approach that had plagued Union efforts earlier, when separate Union armies often acted independently, something Grant himself had observed and chafed against. Now, under Grant's leadership, Union forces pressed the Confederacy on multiple fronts at once. Lee's army in Virginia, the Confederate Army of Tennessee in Georgia, and other forces in the Shenandoah and along the Gulf. Grant's relentless overland campaign in Virginia, though bloody, kept constant pressure on Robert E. Lee. Meanwhile, his subordinate generals, like Sherman, pushed deep into the South. In all of this, Halleck's role was reduced to facilitating orders and logistics from Washington, which he did competently. But strategic decision-making had passed out of Halleck's hands. The contrast was stark. Halleck had been a cautious coordinator, often unwilling to force the issue with his field commanders, whereas Grant, as General-in-Chief, drove the Union war machine forward without pause. By 1864, Grant was firmly in charge and Halleck had faded into the background, marking the final reversal of their wartime fortunes. The fraught Grant-Halleck relationship had lasting consequences for the Civil War's course and ultimate outcome. In the big picture, Grant's perseverance in the face of Halleck's early obstructionism allowed the Union to adopt a far more aggressive and effective strategy than it would have under Halleck's sole leadership. Time and again, Grant overcame Halleck's attempts to hold him back. and the Union reaped the benefits. Halleck's influence tended to slow operations and favor caution, whereas Grant's rise to authority injected energy and urgency into Union campaigns. The shift in their power dynamic by 1864 meant that the Union war effort was finally unified and focused on defeating the Confederacy's armies, rather than being bogged down by interdepartmental rivalries or hesitant strategy. Key outcomes of Grant's ascendancy over Halleck's caution. Unified offensives. Under Grant's supreme command, all Union armies moved in concert, preventing the Confederates from reinforcing one front at the expense of another. This simultaneous pressure stretched the Confederacy to its breaking point. In contrast, when Halleck was in charge, Union armies often acted separately, missing opportunities to exploit their collective strength. Aggressive fighting strategy. Grant's philosophy was to engage the enemy continuously and press the advantage, a stark change from Halleck's delay and entrenched tactics. This aggression led to the capture of pivotal strongholds like Vicksburg and Atlanta, and pinned down Confederate forces such as Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Though the campaigns of 1864 were costly, Grant's attrition strategy drained Confederate manpower that could not be replaced. The relentless pressure applied by Grant's coordinated offensives brought the war to a conclusion that likely would have been delayed under a more passive approach. By war's end, Grant forced the surrender of 3 Confederate armies, including Robert E. Lee's, an achievement unmatched by any other Union general. This underscores how critical Grant's leadership was in securing ultimate victory. Halleck's tenure, by contrast, yielded no such decisive outcome. He was remembered as a capable organizer, but one who failed utterly as a strategist. Without Grant's tenacity, the Union might never have fully capitalized on its advantages in numbers and resources. In summary, the Union's path to victory was profoundly shaped by the turbulent interplay between Halleck and Grant. Halleck's early mistrust forced Grant to prove himself repeatedly, which Grant did, again and again, from Donelson to Shiloh to Vicksburg. Each time Grant persevered, he chipped away at Halleck's doubts and eventually at Halleck's authority. Once Grant assumed the mantle of command, he discarded Halleck's cautious playbook and unleashed the Union Army's full aggressiveness, coordinating massive campaigns that battered the Confederacy into submission. The Civil War might have dragged on even longer, or ended differently, had Halleck succeeded in stifling Grant's rise. Instead, Grant's ultimate triumph over Halleck's impediments allowed the Union to fight with a unity of purpose and offensive vigor that brought final victory in 1865. The fraught relationship between the two generals, antagonistic at first, eventually cooperative out of necessity, thus directly influenced the speed and success of the Union war effort, demonstrating that military leadership and personal dynamics at the top could tip the balance in America's defining conflict.